Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our guidelines for members of the Ananda Sevaka order, which we are offering as the Ananda way of life. We are in the last paragraph of Article 2, which is about community life defined, is how it's described here. So it's how do we live with each other as Master's devotees. So let's pray for a moment here. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to all. Dear Swamiji, help us to understand the deeper vision behind your words, that we may draw through these words a true experience, a real intuitive understanding of what it means to be a disciple of Master, what it means to be part of the Ananda community of spirit, whether physically resident or alone at a distance. Help us to feel the guidance that you placed into these words that will not only instruct, but will actually magnetize us to be able to live according to these ideals. Om. Peace. Amen. The Ananda way of life is not by any means the only way to be a spiritual person, and a tremendous number of things that are written here are also written and could apply to whatever unique lineage you are following. But it also does clearly define that particular strand of spiritual living, that ray of grace is how Swami called it, that puts us in tune with this line of masters. The Sevaka order is a uniquely Ananda entity. By contrast, the Nayaswami order, which Swamiji also founded, it emanates from Ananda at this point, but it is by no means an Ananda entity. It's a reformation of a worldwide sannyas order that was actually started hundreds of years ago, reorganized hundreds of years ago by Adi Shankaracharya. He didn't create it, he just simply reorganized it, which is what Swamiji did. So right now the Nayaswami order and the Sevaka order sort of are laid a bit on top of each other, but they're actually exceedingly distinct. So when I say this is how we act as disciples of Master, and even within, as I spoke earlier, within that larger family of Yogananda's influence, through this one disciple, Swami Kriyananda, it becomes even more specific. And for those of us who understand this in the right way, the deeper you get into the specific, the closer it brings one to one's own point of origin. And it's from that point of origin that everything else can emanate. The more we're in tune with our own superconscious self, our superconscious destiny, the more powerfully we can live. It's all about attunement. In another class that I run on Tuesday nights, where I've been going through Swami Kriyananda's book called In Divine Friendship, which is a collection of letters, personal letters that he wrote. Almost all are personal. A few of them were sent out to the whole community, but it's mostly individual correspondence. In the section that we just read in time sequence 2 days ago, he was talking about his leadership and the way, even though he delegates responsibility, he expands his own consciousness to embrace the person to whom he has delegated responsibility. So the vibration of his energy, the inspiration, the creativity, even the specific ideas are constantly being projected toward that person. But because it's happening on a vibrational level, it allows that person to be able to move within their own vibratory inspiration. But when the two forces match, then Swamiji is able to give his energy also to that person, and their ability to be inspired is amplified, greatly amplified. I speak from years of direct experience of what it feels like to be on the receiving end of Swamiji's expansive consciousness, which is existent even in the present moment. But for that kind of attuned exchange to happen, there has to be a deep commitment on the part of the individual to want to act not merely in accordance with the divine as I understand it or as a person understands it, but specifically with the ray of the divine that is being manifested through this particular work. Many of the people who are drawn to Ananda and may even follow the way of life may not yet either understand or be inclined to align their energy, to put out the effort required, to align their energy deeply with that flow of energy, with that flow of grace. In an attempt to explain to us how universal this was rather than dogmatic, that's why Swami always called it a particular ray of grace. He never called it a place or a person even though it flows through our line of masters and flows through him. It's a particular ray of grace. And this is the great mystery of spiritual understanding, that we do have a home, a spiritual home in a particular lineage, which puts us in harmony with that ray of grace. So that's why it is called the Ananda way of life. We could call it the path of self-realization, but we've gone many levels down to make it more exact. Now again, many of the things that Swami writes here could be said by other lineages quite validly, and the more there is an overlap, the more we as followers of Yogananda would feel in tune with those lineages as well, because we would be cousins, as sometimes brothers and sisters, but sometimes cousins. And over the course of the years, especially in the 70s and 80s, in America, when there were lots of ashrams coming up and lots of wonderful teachers, some of whom would come and visit us at Ananda Village, they would come to see Swami Kriyananda, and then we would all get to meet them. Some felt much more attuned with us than others. They were cousins. Many of the same ways of expressing were also theirs. And others were fascinating and interesting, but not similar enough. On occasion, I visited other ashrams or been to satsangs outside of my own home to other teachers. It's not something that I would seek out, but when the opportunity was there and I felt inspired, of course, there was no reason not to. And I would often walk away saying, thank God that's not my path. Not that there would be anything wrong with it, and the people following it were very, very happy, but it didn't resonate with me. Just the vibration was too different. And of course, as you all know, when I met Swamiji for the first time, I felt an instant rapport with him. Just like this vibration is my vibration. And that's what we're working with the Ananda way of life. The Sevaka order, as I explained at the beginning, is an actual monastic order that many of us have taken life vows to that monastic order. because it's so deeply our own. And then, and more importantly, the principles upon which it is based, which is what we're studying, anybody, anywhere can live according to it. It's a grace to have the karma to be able to live closely with other devotees, but it's just a particular karma. It's not in itself a sign of God's favor or spiritual advancement. It's just a particular karma that some of us have. But the opportunity to be in tune, the ray of grace is always emanating, and it's a question of whether or not we open our curtains and let it in, if you think of it like the sunshine. So now we're on the last chapter of Community Life Defined, and it actually says, how do community members behave when they're not in the community? He said, members, wherever they may go, should see themselves as channels of God and of the ray of divine light that is expressed through Ananda. They should behave themselves accordingly. Joyfully, of course, but never with abandon, and always with God remembrance. They ought to strive consciously to project their inner light, so that light, which is to say God's light through them, may touch on some level everyone they meet. When we would when we would drive from Ananda village, probably up as far as Lake Tahoe. I don't think we had to go farther than that. And that road also led eventually to Reno, Nevada. It led to Nevada. You could go to Reno, then you could go south to Las Vegas, of course. And there was a big billboard that was on the highway there for many years that I think it must have been Lake Tahoe because we passed it more often. And it was like a party scene inside the casino. And the big line across the top said, "Let yourself go in Las Vegas," is what it said. It might have said Reno, but I think it was Las Vegas. Let yourself go in Las Vegas. And then there were this group of people who obviously were intended to be very attractive. It was intended that you would look at those people and you would want to be one of them. You would want to let yourself go in Las Vegas. And when Swami saw it, or at least he commented, I heard for the first time, he looked at that billboard and he said, they don't so much seem to be letting themselves go as falling apart at the seams. We had a lot of conversation about, disintegrate in Las Vegas or whatever other more true words we could write. But what he meant by that was exactly the opposite of what he's saying here. Joyfully, of course, but never with abandon. And that's sort of a word that, just you abandon all restraint. And there is this essential dichotomy, which was so beautifully illustrated by that billboard, which is that self-restraint is anathema, and complete abandonment of all restraint is how we get really, really happy. And the entertainment, the way that we entertain ourselves, nowadays it gets wilder and wilder. The music gets more and more raucous and appeals more and more to the most base instincts in people. The clothing that people wear, the dancing that is considered to be acceptable, and then you add to it what they call, I love the phrase, recreational drugs and alcohol. And you put all of that together, and then people really let themselves go. And you let yourself go to the point where you really do fall apart at the seams, because we separate ourselves so far from that central core of our own reality. And we think we're moving closer to who we really are, but we're moving farther and farther away from our true source of happiness. This is the times we live in, and I have tried to abandon, without total success, my job of policing the entire planet and making sure that everyone knows what I think about what they're doing. I have specifically been the noise in public places police, which really is not working very well for me. So I've more or less resigned as much as I can, just in some vain effort to hold the line. But society doesn't want to. Swamiji himself, and actually in a very serious way, just looking at especially what people call the music, he says, because music reflects consciousness and music creates consciousness. I saw, it was either a documentary or it was a genuine expression of civil wars, barbaric civil wars that are going on right now in certain places in the world. And it was very interesting that the musical soundtrack that the soldiers themselves used was that same kind of, without a melody, heavy beat, screaming lyrics based on angry protestations. And they would carry that music into battle. It's really quite something when you think about it. Swami once, just looking at something that was going on, he just said very seriously, he says, it looks like the world really, really wants to explode in violence. He said, it looks like it's trying to explode. It's working itself up to an explosion, and all of that is true. So then, where do we fit in as devotees? Now, Master has made these predictions, and he started making them, well, he made them when he was still living. But in 1950, Swami talks about hearing Master thunder about the difficulties that were coming, and Master thundered on Sunday and made it seem like it was going to be with us on Monday morning. We're 70 years away now from when Master made those predictions, but now you don't have to be psychic to see it coming. You just sort of see the forces both of the natural world and the human world. However, Master said the only purpose of these difficulties is to bring people back from this crazy brink that they've been rushing toward, and to reawaken in civilization as a whole the remembrance of God's presence within, and us, children of the light. We're here too, and we're here for a very specific purpose, which is we need to be sowing the seeds, building the foundation, developing the understandings, so that when, and unfortunately it's probably when, not if, that violent explosion does take place, we will be here to catch what remains. This is exactly how Master has described it, that there will be a confrontation, there will be a violent destruction of a great deal, but after that, there will be a civilization based on, to an extent, on righteousness and spiritual understanding. Master put it, mankind sick to death of war and violence will enter into a period of an unprecedented period of peace, which will last for several centuries. Swamiji put it another way, that when those forces bent on destruction finally have their day, and a great deal of destruction takes place, afterwards, those of us who have been devoted to the light, he said, will rise phoenix-like from the ashes. And it has occurred to me recently that children of the light, and that's what I'll call all of us, our lineage, our details, our culture, our countries, all of that is extremely incidental. There is a vibration of light that many, many people in many different circumstances have received and are living by, and we all understand each other. And that culture is intact, and all it needs is the opportunity to express itself. through present governments, present political systems, the present vibration allows us only to exist in small enclaves. And that's why all of us Ananda people and children of the light are reaching around the planet right now and just working together or working side by side in harmony for the same goals. Different words, different ways, different emphases, but we all know exactly what we're working for. We all know what it's about. I was thinking of, like, if I am still here, or whoever's here, after the dust settles, it's like we understand. I have 4 of what's needed, but I only can use 1 at a time, so I'll give you 3 of them. I mean, that's how we would just be. You have nothing, I have 4. Here, take these. Pass them out to your friends. Naturally, when we have a choice of helping or hurting each other, we help each other. That's being the instruments of the light. We behave toward each other in the way that Divine Mother would want us to behave. And it gives me great comfort to realize how unified that reality is. So even though self-evidently looking around you can see all the struggle that's happening, I also can see, and I live in this enormous world of children of the light. And when society as a whole turns toward that as a value, there'll just be so many of us just rushing into it, especially if we practice when it's easier. I had this extreme mental dilemma that was based on my Jewish heritage of this expectation of being in the concentration camp. At some point in this life, in this body, in this incarnation, I've gradually begun to realize that's not so likely to happen. One of my friends, when I confessed to her that I'd always had this picture that I would end up in a concentration camp, she said, "You're a 70-something American woman." She said, "What are the statistical chances that you'll end up in a concentration camp?" I thought, And what I actually realized, odd as it may seem, and this is welcome to my brain, oh, they won't imprison me, they'll just kill me right away, so I don't really have to face the problem of imprisonment. I'm too old to be useful. I've passed the point of usefulness. I hope you don't think that's macabre, but that is exactly looking fear right in the face. I thought, okay, death doesn't frighten me as much as imprisonment does. But I had this, and this was from childhood, I had this dilemma, if the person next to me is being beaten by a brutal guard, do I throw my life away trying to save them, or do I just stand and allow it to happen? Whoa, is that a past life memory, or is that just my little brain running crazy? But I really worried about it. I really worried about what I should do. Because again, I've seen enough movies and seen enough books that one person steps out of line and the whole platoon is then, the whole cohort is then punished. So I asked Swami the question, what should I do? He said, what you're actually asking is, in a moment of crisis, how will you know what God wants you to do? And that, in fact, was the question. What is the higher guidance in this moment? The human mind can just spin and spin and spin because, yes, in fact, to interfere might cause grief for everyone. And it's a very difficult question on the human mind, but the divine always knows. The superconscious, the soul guidance is always there. Is my whole life focused on having the courage to sacrifice myself, or do I have to trust God and be restrained? All these questions are there. Swami said, in a moment of crisis, the only way you'll be able to know what God's will is if you have practiced when it was easier. And that phrase has been with me ever since. You have to practice when it's easier. So here Swami says, even when we're away from the community, even when we're out of sight of all our gurubhais, when we're completely alone and can be anyone we wanted to be, always be attuned to the light. Always strive to be an instrument of that light, to give that light to everyone. Swami uses a word which I put into the title of today's talk, and he used the word dignity. He said, a devotee should always have a certain dignity. And that's not pretentious, that's not anything formal. It's just a devotee should always have the constant awareness that I'm a child of God. I'm an instrument of the light. Or one can say, I am the disciple of a great master. And in all circumstances, I have the opportunity to be his face and his voice and his hands in this world. I am the disciple of a great master. That is another mantra that I have used within my heart so many times. Who am I? I am the disciple of a great master. And of course, I learned that from Swamiji, because everything else that he did, all the recognition, all the accomplishments, all the accolades, when Swami was in India, and he would give, in his last years, and the last year of his life, he traveled around and gave what turned out to be his final visit to a number of cities, and gave these programs where hundreds of people would come. Because in India they understand the power of darshan, the power of being close to a holy person, and if possible, touching the feet of a holy person, and if possible, lifting up your baby and putting it on the feet of the holy person. It's magnificent. It is not very American. It's very different. It's very just unrestrained from the heart in a beautiful way. But there were practical problems to it. Swamiji was not strong, not steady on his feet. And so in the auditoriums where he had to exit through the audience, where there was no stage door that he could go through, but he had to exit through the audience, or he wanted to, because people wanted to just see him exit in that way. They literally had to make a cordon of devotees who would hold hands like that just to keep the aisle open. Because otherwise, Swami, it would take hours for Swami to get out of the auditorium, because people would just rush up and throw themselves at his feet. Despite all of that, Swami's only sense of himself, I am Master's disciple. Because in the end, he knew that's all that mattered. To be in tune with the consciousness of the divine through the particular ray of grace that has been given to you, given to me, given to us. And wherever we are, what if Master were here, what would he want to have happen? And how can we know in a moment of crisis? If we've practiced when it was easier. When you're standing in the grocery line and the people in front of you and the people behind you, when you buy your groceries and the clerk is looking right at you, when you walk down the street and you see a homeless person. You know, so, I mean, it's not like you have to talk to everyone or you have to give everyone the shirt off your back, but we have to always be asking the question, in this moment, what would God want from me? And of course, the joy of this is that the channel is blessed by that which flows through it. That's one of Master's wonderful statements. The more we try to act as a channel of light, the more we become that light. And it's an opportunity and a responsibility. And it's the commitment we make when we commit ourselves to the Ananda way of life. I went all over the world with Swami Kriyananda in many unusual circumstances. There were various aspects about him that were very notable. And dignity was a very interesting word to describe it all. He acted joyfully, but never with abandon. He always remembered that he was representing Master. He actually, whenever we go out in public, he always dressed up a little bit more than was required. And it was the dignity of being a disciple. He wanted to present himself in such a way that people would think highly of his guru for having met the disciple. And whenever he had a chance, well, at all times, to everyone he met in every circumstance. He never forgot that. He never forgot to ask, Master, what would you have me do in this circumstance? And so it became that the question didn't even have to be asked, because it was assumed, and the Master was always using him. That's the goal of our life. Through attunement comes realization. And when we hold that thought deeply in ourselves, and always with the question, how can I serve? How can I be your voice, your face, your hands, and your heart in all circumstances? That's the reason why we were born. And let us fulfill this divine privilege that has been given to us. God bless you.